Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nordic Football Podcast 2022 Season Preview. Number one, Part 1, the Eliteserien. I hope you're well. My name is Jonathan Fadugba, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and colleague, Steve Wyss. And the new season is upon us. You may have been waiting many months for these juicy season previews. We do them every year. I think this is year 5 now. We started this podcast in 2017, Steve. Starting to feel a bit old, half a decade. And more than 115 episodes at least. I think we're on 118 episodes roughly. So you are in the best place to be for Norway, Sweden, and even Denmark these days. We have drafted in a friend of ours covering Denmark. So this is the number one place to be for football in Scandinavia. Welcome to the show. My colleague Steve is the Eliteserien expert. For those who are new to the show and haven't been listening, and for those who have been listening, you'll know him as Meat Man Soccer. And he is back. We've got a huge episode today as we preview Eliteserien 2022 season. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my friend, Steve. How are you, my friend?
Jonathan, that was some introduction. Thank you very much. How am I? I've not been so well, unfortunately. As you know, I was COVID positive last week and I was a bit under the weather. And, well, the whole house was a bit under the weather, really. So it's not been ideal for me recently, but I am pretty much close to full health and full strength now, and just in time for the start of the Eliteserien season. So I'm doing all right. Hope you're well too.
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. And they call you, you called your fantasy team last season Meat Man Warriors, didn't you? And I think you're certainly showing the warrior spirit there. Obviously, your positive test. I know you've avoided it for a while, and finally came down with something, but you soldiered on. Because your dedication to this show is unparalleled. So, great to have you back. And before we get into so the format for this season preview, for those who are new to it, basically we predict the whole table. We predict the table and go through team by team and cover the title race. We sort of cover mid-table, and then we look at the teams that we expect to struggle and maybe get relegated, and we put our own predictions in. We're also have 10 to watch, which is our famous 10 to watch. Every year we pick 10 players to keep an eye out for the season to come, and then obviously we monitor them and see how they do during the season. And it's become quite a successful part of the show, hasn't it, Steve? I think we kind of we've got a bit of a knack for discovering talents. Obviously, we have our own personal backgrounds in analysis and scouting and data, that kind of thing, and it's become quite popular. So looking forward to all that in the days and weeks to come. This is our first episode of the season previews. We'll also have an Allsvenskan Swedish season preview coming out this week. So stay tuned. Get us on Spotify or iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. These are going to be 2 free episodes, but we do have a few announcements to make before we get into this show and the season preview. Steve, you happy for me to run through them?
Yeah, you better run through them because my cats are going mental in the background here. This seems to happen every single year on this Eliteserien season preview show.
I know that. I know that your cats get excited about this preview podcast, don't they? Every year they come out with it.
If you hear any background meowing or pussy noises, then you know what it is.
Yes, indeed. So moving swiftly on. Just to sort of recap, we're going to be making some changes to the podcast this year. For those who know, we have a Patreon, and we've decided this season that we will be moving the 10 to watch to Patreon. So this is the formal announcement of 2 new tiers. We have a tier called the Freddie Ljungberg tier, which is coming out, and also the Gold Star Kjetil Knutsen tier on Patreon. This is patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. So our plan this season is we're going to create some bonus content in the year to come, which is going to be available to subscribers only. It's a sort of payment model, and we're moving down that model because we've had so much interest from people within the football world, people who, clubs who listen to this show, scouts, and we feel that it's the time to, we did consider maybe going to an advertising model, as a lot of shows do, run adverts before the show. The good news is we're going to be staying completely advert free on the main podcast. So there'll be a free podcast, which is the one you're listening to now, hopefully, which will be on Spotify, iTunes. And then we're going to also have a bonus podcast, which is going to be on Patreon, and the 10 to watch will be behind that Patreon. So if you go to that website, as I've just mentioned, we will also plug it on Twitter at Nordic Footpod. You will see the plugs to that as the weeks go by. We're also going to be bringing in some new content this season, including YouTube videos. Steve has persuaded me to get the cameras out and actually put my face, my ugly mug on YouTube. So we're working on something for that, which is quite exciting for the 10 to watches. The tiers in terms of Kjetil Knutsen and Freddie Ljungberg, they're slightly different price tiers. Essentially, we're going to be offering match analysis, betting previews, YouTube videos from time to time. Obviously, you can generally support us as well for the lower price tier. And we're also going to be bringing back the player in focus and player profiles, which are also very popular. I think the benefit, Stephen, maybe you'll agree with me, is that it'll be a place for the content to go, that we can store it. We found in the past sometimes that, for example, when we predict a player who's going to be big, if we then try and go back through the archives and find out when we talked about them, we don't have the library system to be able to sort of figure it out. And without sort of hiring someone maybe to help us with all that and going back through the archives, I think now the 10 to watches and things like that, they'll have their own separate section that people can just find on the Patreon, and the player in focus, player profiles, things like that. We've called so many players. I mean, I remember talking about Erling Braut Haaland when he was at Molde, Steve. We've talked about sort of Patrick Berg. There's so many players over the years we've predicted to go on to big things. Jesper Karlsson. I could name so many players, and Håkon Evjen, Aslak Witchery. So we feel like that is a strong area of the podcast, and it's time to sort of maybe ask for something in return for that, I think. In terms of the free podcast, which we'll continue every week in that format with match analysis, season previews, obviously, which you listen to now, weekly match talk and discussions of the league, what's going on, our predictions for the season. And also fantasy football will be a mixture between Patreon and free. So week to week, we'll discuss the fantasy leagues and what's going on, but we'll also have sort of bonus content for fantasy as well, so from time to time on Patreon. And obviously, we tend to have exclusive interviews on this show, don't we? We've had some incredible guests over the years, and those will continue to go on our free show as well. So you're going to get most of what you're getting already, but we're going to offer something extra now for subscribers who are already existing, and also those maybe who want to join us and commit to knowing a little bit more in detail and insight into Scandinavian football, because I've said it for many years, and it is without being boasting, but I think we're the number one place for these leagues. I think we offer great value in terms of content, and I think it's time now, especially when the leagues are sort of paywalling, all the local news sites are paywalled now, and we obviously have to access that as well to get the latest news and things like that. I think it's time, maybe that's a new way. So patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast if you're interested, to sign up to those tiers and access the 10 to watches and everything else I've just mentioned. Steve, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, are you excited about this season and this new format we're going down in terms of player profiles and players in focus and YouTube videos?
Yeah, very well explained there, Jonathan. And I must say thanks to all those who have supported us on Patreon over the last few years. You've not always had great value for money, but you will certainly be getting that now, because we have got some, we're committed to very much regular content on there. We've got a specific goal in mind in terms of the type of content we want each particular week. And I think this will probably become more clearer after a few weeks. The content will be there on Patreon, and you will know what you can access and unlock. And not a lot changes really in terms of the main podcast here. It's going to be free each week, and it's going to be very, very similar. But we're just going to be adding some extra things on Patreon, which some might find interesting. And it's going to be good quality content. It's got some YouTube videos set up as well, which will bring the voice to the face in terms of myself and you, Jonathan, in this. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And like I said, I think unfortunately, you mentioned the paywalls there, and it's very much widespread now up in Scandinavia. And we want to support them sites as well. They've got to make a living, and so have we really. So it's all kind of all things together. I think we've got a good plan going forward. I'd like to think anyone that does join the Patreon will get good value for money. So we'll take it from there. I'm sure we can provide some really good content, and I'm looking forward to the season ahead in Norway and Sweden.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned, the prices aren't sort of crazy. So if you check out the website or the links, you'll see. I mean, we're talking, a pint or a couple of cups of coffee per month type thing. It's a subscription model, and we'll be offering good value for that. I think, if you're a scout, if you're an analyst, if you're working in recruitment in Sweden, you want to know the best young players, maybe you want to know the best performing players. You want to know, if you're someone who's involved in betting, for example, if you're 18 or over, and you want to sort of maybe get weekly tips from Meatman, a world-class betting analyst, that's going to be the place to be able to find that kind of content. We will still talk about players, obviously, weekly on the show, so there's no real difference there. But yeah, that's the way we're going to go for the beginning of this season. We hope you'll support it, and we hope you'll sort of get by it, because we've offered sort of 5 years worth now of pretty much free content. And I think that as much as we'd love to continue to do that, we also need to consider the time that goes into the show in bringing you the best analysis we can. So hopefully that is a well-explained way of explaining it. But let's now get into the meat of this episode, Steve. The season preview for Eliteserien 2022. Now, before we start, just give me a bit of a recap on 2021. What happened and what's happened since then? The winter window came along. There were some transfers, which we'll talk about. Obviously, Bodø Glimt have been in Europe. So just tell me how the season ended, kind of recap the end of that season. And then, who won the league, who went down, who should we look out for coming up? And then just tell us about the kind of run up the last few months, what's been going on before we get into your predictions.
Yeah, it was quite an exciting season, really. We had a two-way title battle, went to the last game of the season. Bodø Glimt retained their crown. 2 years in a row, they've now won the gold medal. And 2 years in a row, Molde finished second after they won the gold medal in 2019. Down at the bottom of the table, Mjøndalen relegated along with Stabæk automatically. Brann lost out to Jerv in a wild playoff on penalties. And what else of note? Rosenborg failed to qualify for Europe for the first time in well over a decade. They finished down as low as fifth. And yet again, more disappointment in Oslo with Vålerenga finishing seventh and beaten by their arch rivals Lillestrøm into fourth. And well, since then, I guess the big storyline has been in Europe with Bodø Glimt qualifying up to the quarterfinals of the Europa Conference League. There's been plenty of transfers. The Norwegian Cup's been going on. We're now at the semi-final stage of the Norwegian Cup. We've got Molde against Godset and Glimt against Viking. So that is all coming up in the next few weeks. And now the start of the Eliteserien season, Saturday, the 2nd of April, and things get underway.
Yeah, and it was a really good title race. I enjoyed it. Molde sort of hung in there, didn't they? And you did predict last season Bodø Glimt would win the league. I remember you even saying if they matched their previous season, the 2020 season, when they nearly went the whole season unbeaten, you said you'd go vegan for a week on last year's show. Didn't quite happen for you, did it? They had a lower points total, didn't they, than the previous year, but still managed to win the league by quite a comfortable margin. What do you expect for this season's title race? And do you think it'll be kind of quite close, without giving obviously your top two away? Maybe how are you sort of forecasting this season based on last year? Because it was only a 3-point gap between Molde and Bodø Glimt last season.
Yeah, I think we can expect perhaps something similar again in terms of the sides involved. And also, look, what Glimt achieved in 2020 was something once in a lifetime, or in a generation. We may never see the likes of that points tally again, that goals tally again. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone gets to 70 points, let alone, 80. I think we're going to get plenty of excitement. I think it's going to be really close in the bottom half of the table. We'll come to that later. I think there's several sides that you could say, they might go down, they might go down. There's a real case to make for a lot of different teams there. So I think we're going to be close at both ends of the table. I think we're going to get a really attack-minded league. Some new managers coming in have promised entertaining, exciting football. We've lost Mjøndalen, no disrespect, but they were fairly boring. We've lost Stabæk, who, it's not always been the greatest watch over the last few years. So I think we're in for a really exciting season.
I think I just had your cat there. I'm not sure, but
there's something going on. It's as if there's a mouse going on, moving around somewhere. This happens every year without fail on the Eliteserien Season Preview, I tell you.
Do you get a lot of mice in your area?
No. I mean, that was just a joke. But if there's mice in my house, I'm not too happy. But I don't know what it is about these cats on this show. I mean, last year, was it 2 years ago, I got attacked by one midway through.
I've got to say, well, they're excited as we are for this season preview. So listen, you've given the sort of overview of last season. Let's now get into this and tell us who you've got. Normally we do top to bottom, don't we? So we predict the champions first. And this season, you haven't gone any different. I'm looking at your season previews now. You've got in first place. Who have you got, Steve? You tell us.
I am predicting Bodø Glimt to win the title again. This is obviously not the most original pick in the world, but I see them going 3 times in a row here. Bodø Glimt, they're quite simply the best unit, the best side in Norway right now, as we can see in the Europa Conference League. They are playing at a very high level. Kjetil Knutsen has got them, operating like a really well-oiled machine. And the big thing for me was them keeping the manager. I mean, we didn't expect Kjetil Knutsen to be taking charge, did we, this season? I mean, the back end of last season, we were talking about what club is going to get him. He was linked with several sides. And I'm sure at some stage he will move on. But you've got to think he probably lasts at least a whole season here, or quite a long, at least until mid to late summer, and something really tempting might come up. But just keeping Knudsen will always give Bodø Glimt a massive chance of winning the league, and they've got a very, very good squad again. And yes, they've lost players, but they've signed well. There's youngsters or players from within their own setup that are ready to step up and be counted, as we've talked about before. And they've had the challenge of Europe before, the experience of dealing with that. And I think they'll be well equipped for a title defence in 2022. And I feel like some of those below maybe are not as strong as they would want to be either.
So you're going for a 3-peat for Bodø Glimt, which would be incredible, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure how many teams have won 3 back-to-back. I mean, I imagine Rosenborg have done it at some point, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Rosenborg won about 10 in a row, didn't they? I think in the 90s.
Yeah.
Or maybe like 13 in a row or something ridiculous. But not something done very often in recent times.
And I mean, Kjetil Knudsen signed a new deal, didn't he? He signed a new contract at the back end of last season when there was a lot of rumours that he would leave. We've already established he's pretty much one of the best managers, if not in Scandinavia, then perhaps in Europe, given the style of football, the beatings they've dished out to like Jose Mourinho. They've really been good in Europe as well, haven't they? I mean, they just knocked out AZ Alkmaar, didn't they? Yeah,
they did, and it was a close tie. They got past Celtic very comfortably, and all this is on the back. This is during their off season. The Norwegian season hasn't yet started, so they've done magnificently well to be where they are, and. We in the episodes we've had so far this season. Sorry, one of my cats is going absolutely mental. We're going to have to pause this. Hold on.
Well, listen, your cat seems to scream whenever Bodø Glimt are name dropped, and it's quite funny to think that before 2020 they'd never won the league in their entire history, and now you're going for a 3-peat for them. Interestingly enough, looking back through Eliteserien records, obviously in the past it was called the Tipper League as well, wasn't it? Rosenborg won the title 13 times between 1992 and 2004. But the only other team to do a 3-peat since the 1970s, you've got to go back to. Even since the 1960s, in fact. The last team to do that was Viking in the 70s, 72 to 75. They won 4 in a row. So this would be, almost unprecedented in the sort of last 40, 50 years, besides Rosenborg and that great Viking side. So, yeah, you're going for them to win the title. It would be an incredible achievement for Knudsen if he stays. Who are the key players that they've sort of got in their team? One thing I noticed about Bodø Glimt, every year they seem to lose probably their 2 or 3 best players. What formation do you expect them to line up in, and how do you expect them to look with new signings, etc.?
Well, it's going to be 4-3-3 again. And, if you haven't listened to any of our previous episodes this calendar year when we previewed the Celtic and Europa League matches, briefly, the key losses are Patrick Berg, Erik Botheim, Marius Luda, and Fredrik Andre Bjørkan. Now, obviously, that's the players from all different areas of the field, and replacing them are Bryce Wembanyama, who is coming from Sandefjord, fullback, primarily a right back, but at the moment he's playing left back for Glimt. Up front, Runar Espejord has come in from, Heerenveen, but really it's from Tromsø, isn't it? Their arch rival is one of the strikers. And replacing Patrick Berg in midfield is going to be a guy from within Elias Kristoffersen Hagen, who plenty of talk about him this season. He can step up and go really well. They brought in Anders Konradsson from Rosenborg, an experienced head in the middle of the park who should go well. And, in terms of other key players within the squad, I would say Hugo Vettelson. This is probably his year to really step up. Obviously, Ulrich Soltnes, the captain, is a crucial leader for them in the middle of the park. And, keeping Armel Pellegrino, who was only on a short-term contract last season. There was talk that he would leave the club, but they've retained his services, and we know he kills the Eliteserien. So they've got plenty of other top quality players around. Solbakken always catches the eye on the wings there, and the goalkeeper's actually starting to finally get a bit of credit. Nikita Kaikin, who is actually, he may even leave the club in the summer. Actually, I could see him leaving. He's steadily got better. They've got good all-round strength. They've lost players, but they do a great job in replacing them.
I would just add on that, if you look at some of the transfers going out, Botheim, 4.5 million according to Transfermarkt to Krasnodar, Patrick Berg, 4 million to Lens, Elias Hoff Melkersen, nearly 400 grand to Hibernian in Scotland. You're really seeing, Frederick Andrew Bjorkan's gone to Hertha Berlin on a free. We're seeing a lot of players leave the league, isn't it? And I just wonder, how is that going to affect Bodø Glimt? And with some of the players coming in, Brice Wembangomo, Anders Conrads and players like that, how you see them lining up?
Oh, they've done very well in the transfer market. They've recouped nearly 10 million pounds, which is a tremendous amount for a club like Bodø Glimt. Even like Melkersen to Hibs there for nearly 500,000. That's a lot of money for someone who hardly ever played a minute for Bodø Glimt. So, Botheim was Krasnodar paid way too much money for him. So they've done very well, Bodø Glimt in the market, and this. If they manage themselves well off the field as well as on it, there's no reason why they can't become a consistent, formidable force in Norwegian football. Yeah, they're not a traditional powerhouse, but if they play their cards right, then they can certainly become a real stronghold of Norwegian football. That amount of money in itself is, if they invest that wisely, then fair play. But they've done really well to get the money they have. They've obviously lost some good players for free as well, which is a shame. But they've not exactly spent a lot of money, and a lot of these guys are coming on free transfers. Conrads and Wembangomo, for example, and you just know that the coaching system here and the environment means that players will be up coached and become better at Bodø Glimt.
Fantastic stuff. So you got Bodø Glimt first place.
I have got them winning the league again, and if you look at how they've done it over the last 2 seasons. Last year, they found a different way to get the gold medal. It wasn't plain sailing. They came through some sticky spells, and I think they'll use that experience to good effect this year. They do have distractions. They will be in the Champions League qualifiers again in July, August, or European qualifiers. They're still in the Conference League, and we had a question from it was Team Overs. Thank you very much for the question. Do you expect Bodø to start off slow in the Eliteserien with the priority being given to the Conference League, and how will they handle it? Yeah, it's not going to be easy. They've got a double header against Roma, and who knows, they might beat them again and get through to semi-finals and stuff. There's no doubt the first few weeks, I think, will be tricky for Glimt, and they've got, I think, Rosenborg first match. They've got Vålerenga in there, Viking as well. They've got a Norwegian Cup semi-final. So they might be vulnerable in the first few weeks and drop a few points. But then I think they'll get into a nice rhythm probably around sort of end of May, throughout the whole of June and then early July. And then obviously European qualifiers start again. But I just see them as the best overall team. The best coach side. They've got plenty of quality. And, I'm going to talk about some of the other contenders soon. But I just don't really see Bodø Glimt dropping below 60 points. And 60 is probably enough to win this league right now. You don't need to be sort of mid to late 60s or 70 to get the gold medal. So I don't really see them dipping below that sort of mark. I think they're quite a consistent side that usually really strong at home. That's Mira Stadion is a really tough place to go. Well up north. Sometimes, teams just don't fancy it. They only lost once in the league at home last year. That was to Molde. It's quite simply a fortress. And yeah, they do have a few problems away sometimes, notoriously on grass, but there's only 5 grass surfaces now in the Eliteserien. And if you end up playing there in the middle of summer, it doesn't really make much difference. Like I say, I don't think we can expect anything like the 2020 levels of, knocking on the 80-point door and things like that. But I think they're going to be right up there in the title race. Yes, they will drop some points. It's just a question, will other teams have enough about them to be strong and get into the sort of mid to late 60-point mark? And I don't think that's going to happen, personally.
You're predicting them to retain the title. Let's move to your second place prediction. Last season, you predicted Vålerenga in second. And to be fair to you, they had a really good season. So, I'm not going to get any back for that. It was slightly off, but, they certainly showed their ability, didn't they, with a decent campaign. This season, who have you got in second place?
Yeah, this is a bit of a surprise, actually. A lot will not expect this, but I'm putting Rosenborg in second place. Now, hear me out here, because they're not exactly high on people's lists right now. But there's a few reasons for, I think, Rosenborg are going to do well. Number one, they're not in Europe. Now, that can be a big thing, because we've seen in July, August, teams like Molde, Bodø, Glimt last season, they can go through slumps. It just catches up with you, all this travel, and the qualifying matches are so important for these teams. They get, the money and the income from that. Rosenborg, for the first time in over a decade, they're not going to have that worry. So that's the important thing. I was just looking through the actual squads on paper as well. And it's a very good, in terms of quality, they're right up there with both Molde and Glimt. And, I think if they really had an elite manager in charge of them, they could probably title challenge. They do have a new manager this season in Kjetil Rekdal, who comes in from HamKam. He led HamKam to the league title of the Obos last season. Now, Rekdal may not have tremendous managerial pedigree, but he does have a great reputation from back in the day, well over 100 Norwegian caps. He was a real solid defender back in the day. You wouldn't mess with him. He commands respect, and I think we've got to give him a little bit of respect as a manager as well. He tends to produce quite solid teams, and we can't expect miracles from day one. And they may get off to a slow start, but I've looked at their fixture list. They've got a lovely span of games in the middle of the summer where they could, by then, they might be settled and get on a really good winning run, whilst other teams are dropping points due to the European backlog. So I think there's a few factors. I think over the course of the season, they might just sort of gradually move up the table and could be the side that sort of nick second place.
Yeah, and I've seen that they've lost Dino Islamovic, who was previously in Sweden, wasn't it? It doesn't look like it's gone too well for him. He's moved to South Korea. Who would you say the key sort of transfers they brought in, Stephen? How are they shaping up? Because just to give a bit of background for listeners, Rosenborg's last two season finishes, finishing the fifth last season, which was incredible, behind Lillestrøm even and Viking. And the year before that, they finished fourth. So they've really been on a bit of a downward spiral, haven't they? They are the Bayern Munich of this league. But it's really been a few years in the doldrums. 15 points off Glimt last season. How do they make that up, and how close can they get to Glimt?
They've had problems off the field. They've just not been making the right decisions transfer-wise, manager-wise, a bad feeling around the place. Even Rekdal coming in, he wasn't the first choice manager. They wanted Knudsen. They wanted the guy from Hammarby, I do believe. I forget what his name was. They were linked with others. It's like Rekdal's almost like sloppy thirds or fourths. But it doesn't mean he can't make an impact here. I honestly feel like most managers could come in this squad and certainly should challenge for a medal with the quality they've got. Who is going to be? I mean, they've signed Brian Fiabima on loan from Chelsea. Now, for those who play Football Manager, this is a lad who's been off one of the wonder kids in the last 2 or 3 versions. He's very fast. I've never actually seen him play much, but very quick winger. He looks quite good. They've got Victor Jensen on loan from Ajax. Either-footed, creative midfielder. I think he could go well. They've signed Tobias Borkijk, who was ex-Stabæk. He's 23 years old now. It didn't quite work out for him away from Norway, but I think he could be a really solid signing for them at the back. Samuel Rogers, they brought Rekdal's brought him with him from HamKam last season. Unfortunately, he's injured for the first 7 or 8 weeks now to start the season, but supposedly the American is quite a good player. And, they've got quality from within as well, which I'll talk about, I'm sure. But this is a good squad. I'm not saying it's absolutely loaded, but there's enough quality here. Rosenborg, they're historically they're the biggest club in this country, and they've had a bad season. They're going to want to get their pride back, and I'm not underestimating them this year.
In terms of the manager that you've mentioned there, I suppose you're expecting them to turn it over, and you said no Europe as well. That's probably quite a big thing for them. What do you think their potential upturn in fortunes this season will be based on? Will it be because they have a strong defense, or will it be because they've got really good strikers? Where are you seeing them getting these gains? Because 58 scored last season, which wasn't too bad actually. Second best in the league, I think. No, third best in the league. No, fourth best in the league actually. Sorry. And they conceded 42, which was obviously where they leaked quite a lot of goals, didn't they? Where do you see them improving this season?
Defensively, I think Rekdal is known for his organisation, his discipline. That Hamkan side last season in Obos Ligue 1 had the best defensive record by far. And I know you can't really compare the two divisions, but he will set up, I think, quite hard to break down at times. And let's be honest, they've still got a very good goalkeeper in Andre Hansen. They've got a very good understudy in Julian Feierlund. So they've got goalkeeper sorted. Defensively, Raitan was really solid at right back last year. Adrian Nielsen Pereira at left back, I think, has got a good year ahead of him. They've got some experience like Marcus Henriksen, Pershian Shelbred in midfield. I think that's where they can improve. They probably will nick a few good 1-0s and 2-0s at times once they've settled in. I think they could have a bit of a turbulent start to the year. The fixture list is not easy. But like I said, things do then settle down and they might just gradually... I don't think they're going to be necessarily a great watch, Rosenborg, but they'll be effective, I think, and that's all they need to be at times. In addition to their individual players like Carlo Holzer, I think it's kind of a really strong campaign. And Vecchia, of course, on the wings was one of their few standout players last season who I expect to kick on this year. But I certainly think they can improve defensively and probably improve their efficiency in attack.
Great stuff. Let's move to third place. You mentioned, just to recap slightly, so you got Bodø top, Rosenborg second. Who have you got third?
Yeah, I'm going Molde in third place. And this might easily... Last season, I was exactly the same. I put them third and they finished second. So I might be wrong again. They may well be the side that does challenge Bodø Glimt for the top. But I'm a bit worried. They've lost a couple of key players. They're switching formations. And I'm just concerned that defence of theirs, it concedes too many goals for my liking. And eventually that will... Molde have had this motto of mantra of just outscoring sides in the last few years. And often it does work, but sometimes that isn't good enough. And, they might lose a wild game like 4-3 or draw a daft one 3-3. And their defence, I think, could cost them points. And that concerns me a little bit. They've lost Ohi, who was the top scorer in the league last year. Been a top man for them. Andreas Linder in goal is arguably a more concerning departure as well, though, because he was crucial for them in the last few seasons. I think he kind of papered over a lot of cracks at the back, and they've signed Jakob Karlström from Tromsø, who's a bright keeper, and I rate him. But I feel if they wanted to go with a domestic keeper, I think there's 2 or 3 others I would have gone with. I'm kind of surprised they didn't go for a more premium foreign keeper option, though. So a few little concerns. They're still going to be well up there, though. Molde, they've got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of attacking talent. We know they're going to be exciting to watch. And, for sure, they will be in the mixture, I think, to the title challenge.
Yeah, you mentioned they've lost, with the top scorer in the league, you said there, Owie. He's gone to Red Star, which is quite a big deal for him. Obviously, he's 28 now, going to Serbia, top tier, big club. You've also mentioned, obviously, their departure, the goalkeeping departure, Greuther Fürth he's gone to in Germany. Looking at some of these new signings, they've brought in sort of a lad from Odd. They've even brought in Erik Haugen from Ostersund. Obviously, I can comment on him, centre back, 24-year-old. Where are they going to? Who are the number one? Who's going to be the replacement in goal, and number two, who's going to be the man up front for them? Because I got to sort those two out, haven't they?
Yeah, Karlström obviously comes in from Tromsø, the number one keeper. Was fairly impressive for Thiel over the last couple of years, to be honest with you. And but he's still a bit raw as well, and it's always a big step up moving up to a title contender, isn't it? So I think there's definitely some question marks there. In terms of striker, David Datro Fofana, I think there's a lot on his shoulders. And last season we expected an awful lot from him, but he actually only ended up playing, I think I've got written down here, he only played something like 300 Eliteserien minutes. He's yet to score an Eliteserien goal. If he had said that to me this time last season, I would have said, no way. So he has got to step up this season. Otherwise, they're going to be relying on guys like Sigurd Darson if he's fit, or even someone like Wolf Eichem or Bryn Hilton might have to play up front if things aren't working out with Fofana or Mattis Bolly. Goodness, I mean, God help them if they're relying on him. But Fofana's got to work out for them up front, or there could be some trouble there. They've got loads of other, attacking players who will chip in. We actually had a question from FPL Oatwell. Thanks for this question. Thoughts on the Wolf playing in a false 9 this year? Seems to have gone that way pre-season. Is that to look after his body a little bit more? And yeah, Magnus Wolf Eichem has been in that, well, you want to call it like the sort of the Man City false 9 position. Almost strikerless in a way with Molde. And I don't like it. I've got to be honest. He should not be the most... Well, he wouldn't be the most advanced player up front, would he? But he certainly shouldn't be a focal point in that way. For me, Wolf Eichem is best as a number 10 playmaker with a fast striker or a target man striker in front of him and fast wingers alongside. So for me, I don't personally like it. Now, FPL Oakle makes a very good point about looking after Wolf Eichem's body. He's well known for not lasting 90 minutes very often. And if he is on the field 90 minutes, Molde have got problems. Usually 60, 70 minutes and he's off and he's substituted off. Usually he's done quite a lot of damage by then. I say, my personal opinion, could we see him using that false 9 role? It looks like they're looking to do that, but I'm not a fan of it. And I'm not sure long term it would work out. They need to get him back in his more normal role and position. I think that's where he's more effective, in my personal opinion. But yeah, for me, defensively, there are doubts. I mean, Erik Haugen's coming from Östersunds. I don't know an awful lot about him, but that's a side that's just been relegated in Sweden. So that for me is a little bit of a worry. But I mean, they've got plenty of overall strength. They're going to try and outscore sides. I just think some days the defense will let them down.
Haugen's a decent player. I don't think think he's reflected in Östersund's relegation. I don't think he can be too much implicated in that. He's a player who's always been tipped to go on, and I think he's at that age now where he's probably ready for a step up. In quality, going to sort of a big team in Norway. I think he'll profit from that, and that doesn't look too bad a sign for me. So I wouldn't judge him too harshly. Be interesting to see how he gets on, of course. And he is Norwegian at the end of the day, isn't he? So. I don't see that as being something too much of a downgrade necessarily, but we'll see how it goes. Obviously, you never know how players adapt to new environments. Steve, just tell us about the manager a little bit and how his influence. You mentioned they might change the formation. How might that change things a little bit?
Yeah, Erling Moo retains his place as manager, and I've always praised him quite highly on this podcast. I think he's almost an underrated manager. He's great man management. However, I'm not sure about this tactical change. He's always been a religious 4-2-3-1 man. You knew exactly how Molde were going to line up. But he, in pre-season and in the cup matches so far, has been looking at 3-4-3. Now, I'm not a big fan of 3-4-3, as you know from last season. If you're going to do 3 at the back, I like 3-5-2. But the problem I've got if they're going with 3-4-3 is I don't think they've got the personnel for a 3-4-3. At Molde necessarily. I think there's a lack of centre backs at times. There's too many fitness doubts. Sheriff Sinian, Martin Björnbach are starting the year on the sidelines, and both do have fitness concerns. The new lad Benjamin Hansen from Haugesund's a big lad at the back, and Horgan from Östersund, I suppose that adds to depth. But I think we're going to end up seeing Molde play sort of fullbacks at centre back. This is a modern trend now, isn't it? That the wide centre halves are often converted fullbacks, and that might work out for them. But I just feel that Molde are better suited to a flat back 4, and in terms of in the attacking roles necessarily, I don't think it suits them that well either. But look, I might be proved wrong here. Maybe Erling Moo just felt he had to change something up to try and win the league and get one over Bodø Glimt. I don't know, but I don't think an awful lot was wrong with the 4-2-3-1. If it isn't broke, why fix it? And I'm a little bit surprised he's going for this. But at least, he can't be accused of just changing nothing. And it may well work out in time. But I just feel for Molde, it might not be the right thing.
Great stuff. So you got Bodø top, Rosenborg second, Molde third. Just looking at the fixtures, by the way, first day of the season, Bodø Rosenborg, that's a huge game. Sunday, April 3rd, evening game, so tune in for that. And Molde are home to Vålerenga, first game of the season. I mean, we will do a pre-season prediction on the Patreon, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. We'll probably predict some of these games every week or every other week. We'll basically be predicting the game week ahead, and we'll pick 3 or 4 of predictions for us from a betting point of view, either teams to win or goal scorers or sort of overs, unders, that kind of thing. So if you are interested, as I said, head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, and you can check out all the information there. So I won't ask you for your prediction now, Steve. We'll save that for later in the week. But let's, in the meantime, I mean, for fun, it looks like if anyone playing fantasy, he's 10.5 on the Eliteserien Fantasy as well. So he really is probably going to have to shoulder some of the burden left by Owie. But let's move on to your fourth place team, Steve. Who have you got in fourth?
Yeah, I'm going with Viking in fourth, and that'll be a drop down of 1 spot for them. But they could easily challenge for a medal again. They had a really good season last year, and they're still in the Norwegian Cup, the semi-final stage there. They've got a joint manager duo called Bjarte Lunde Arsheim and Morten Jensen. And you won't hear me mention them by name very often. It'll be there's actually 3 teams now in this league with dual managers. It seems to work well at Viking. They've got a good thing going, and this team's full of goals, full of excitement, and they have lost a key man in Joe Bell in midfield. There's no doubt about that. We can't shy away from that fact. But really, he's the only significant departure at the time of writing. And all right, and they might lose some players in the summer, but this is a side that they've done their best to replace Bell, and they brought in Marcus Solbakken, a youngster, a good young talent from Stabæk, and Niklas Sandberg, a creative, real versatile player from Haugesund. And I think the combination of those two coming in will go some way to replacing Bell. So, yeah, I like Viking again. I don't think an awful lot is going to change with them. Their matches last season averaged the most goals out of anyone, 3.6 per game. So they're exciting, they're entertaining, they're especially strong at home. In Veton Berisha, they probably have the best striker in the whole league. He's the bookmaker's favourite to win the Golden Boot. And if he stays fit and if he stays at the club, I think it's hard to really argue against that. So this is a side that's always got a lot of goals in it. They've got a lot of exciting players. And I'd certainly recommend any neutrals to give Viking a watch. They are in Europe, though, as well. And that might be a potential hindrance. They might not go far in Europe. So, the last time I think Aberdeen beat them in one match during the COVID season. But it is something to consider if they were to go on a qualifying run. It might hinder them mid-season. And just because I think Rosenborg are going to improve this year, I see them dropping down 1 spot. But I think Viking are going to be stronger. I could see them getting 50 points and more once again.
Yeah, Viking, they haven't had too much transfers in and out, have they? I mean, Joe Bell, as you've mentioned, they're quite a big. So you were high on him, weren't you? I think you even wrote a blog about him on Y-Scout. Wrote about him on Y-Scout. Just to remind us, we are renewing our partnership with Y-Scout, of course. Analysis providers, video scouting. So we're delighted to be with them again for another season. And we will be using that to bring you expert analysis and continuing to write monthly blogs for them. How are they going to replace Joe Bale, Stephen? Have they dipped into the transfer market for that? I mean, I've seen they've brought Marcus Solbakken in from Stabæk. They brought a keeper in as well, haven't they, from Brentford?
Yeah, Solbakken and Sandberg and a player from within, Harold Tangen, I rate quite highly. I think could go to some way. No one player can replace what Bell did. He was like the ultimate sort of box-to-box playmaker sort of figure. One person isn't going to replace him. And they only got about roughly $1 million for him from Brøndby, which I think was a real steal for them. But he's gone now. But nevertheless, I think they've kind of replaced him with just numbers, and that can certainly go some way to helping things out. Things I don't like so much about Viking, the goalkeeper situation, I think, is a little bit questionable. It will either be Patrick Gunnarsson or Arild Østbo. The legendary Ivan Østbo is now retired, 36 years old. But goalkeeper's never been that strong for Viking in the last few years, and it is a little bit of a question mark area. We know the defence will give up chances. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, the defenders will create chances. The fullbacks will get forward. the likes of Patanyama, Sebiulson, I think is a player to really watch out for this year. And they like to play football, the Viking. They've got goals in them, like I said, exciting side to watch. And, they had a really good away record last season as well. So a lot of positives to say. Sometimes when you have a good season the next year, they can be a bit of a downer, can't they? But I feel they can certainly stay relatively the same.
Good to hear it. Viking, quite a big club, aren't they? Obviously, we've lost one big club, Brann, who were relegated. Their manager, Steve, before we move on, just briefly, any thoughts on their manager? It's going to be a second season now, isn't it? He was appointed in 2021.
Well, they've got a dual managerial Beate Lunde Aschheim and Morten Jensen.
Yes.
It's staying the same again, and it seems to work really well for Viking. I mean, I don't get it, but it seems to be a Scandinavian thing, doesn't it? Where these joint managers actually tend to work out quite well.
Fantastic. So they're in fourth place. Last season they finished third. So they're in a decent sort of trajectory. As you said, they've got European football as well to contend with. Let's look at your fifth place team, Steve.
Yeah, I'm really torn here. I'm going with Lillestrøm in fifth, and I'm going with Vålerenga in sixth. But I was really close to switching these two around. I can't decide between either two for this spot, but I'm going ultimately with Lillestrøm in fifth. I might be wrong here. They had a really good season last time, fourth place for them, and they will be in Europe as long as Strømsgodset don't win the Norwegian Cup. And I can't see them winning it because they would have to beat Molde away and then beat Viking or Glimt in the final. So the likelihood is Lillestrøm will be on their travels in July. Again, similar to Viking, how will they cope with that? How many games will they have in the qualifying run? If the games rack up, then it could affect their league form potentially. We know it is difficult, but they had a really strong season last year, and I almost wonder if it was an overachievement. And sometimes expectations are then going through the roof a little bit, and the next season can be a bit of a downer. And part of me worries a little bit. Call it even second season syndrome if you want, because they did get promoted, obviously last year. So I'm a little bit tentative here that Lillestrøm, there's a chance that maybe expectations are too high and they kind of drop down a little bit. I mean, I do think they are going to drop down a place or two, but just not significantly. It's still a good squad. They have lost certainly one really key player in Thomas Len Olsen, the striker. That concerns me. He was a massive part of their game plan. But in general, I think their business has looked quite good. They've got a good manager. The club is back on the up again. The supporters are well behind the team. And, it should in theory be a solid season. It just does the thing in the back of my head, will they have sort of just a slight downer compared to the highs of last term?
Yeah, you mentioned their transfers. They brought in quite an interesting one, haven't they? Colin Rosler, who is the son of former Malmö manager Uwe and Manchester City player. That's quite an interesting one, I think. Do you know much about him? I mean, he was actually at Manchester City as a kid. Don't know how much you know about him, but Norway under-21 international, previously England under-16 international as well. But obviously has some heritage in Norway as well. What are your thoughts on their general transfer business, including Rosler?
I don't know much about Rosler, but I've got written down on my spreadsheet, big lad from Knack Breda. So, it kind of fits in with Lillestrøm. They're quite a physical side. There's some really big bodies here, but they've got some good technical ability as well. It's a nice mix that they have.
Yeah.
And they've had a bit of for example, in the transfer market, they sold Magnus Knudsen, promising midfielder, to Rostov. I think they got nearly £1 million for him, or quite a fair bit. He's now back on loan until June because of the Russian football situation. Players were allowed back. And so that's a nice little touch that they've got there. So they kind of sold him, but they've got him back until June. They've brought in Frederick Holst, an aggressive centre midfielder from Elfsborg. You might know a little bit more about him than me. And replacing Len Olsen is Holmbert Frid Johnson. The last time Frid Johnson was in this league, he did score quite a few goals for Aalesund. And a lad from Songdal in the Obos, a Nigerian called Akor Adams, a fast attacker. So they've kind of brought in a couple of different type of players up front there who they'll hope to fill Len Olsen's boots. In theory, it might work out quite well. And Ildren Ibrahimad is back as well in this league. Had a great spell at Viking. They've now brought him back in, very experienced at Eliteserien level. So I do quite like the transfers.
Yeah, quite an eclectic mix there. Halster's an experienced player. He's been a good player for Rosenborg in the past. I think he'll come in and sort of he won't go too far wrong. I don't think. Solid sort of pro, I would say. That's the description I would have of him. Let's move on from Lillestrøm then. I mean, the funny thing about Lillestrøm for me is that you used to be quite down on them, and they've gone down, come up again, and now you're quite a big fan of them. You sometimes it shows that maybe getting relegated isn't the worst thing in the world. It can help you kind of refresh the club a little bit, can't it? And they're now on a decent trajectory. You've mentioned Adams there. I mean, there's a lot of recruitment from the lower leagues, isn't there, in Norway at this moment in time, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But let's just round off your top six. Who have you got in sixth place, Steve?
Yeah, I've gone with Vålerenga in sixth place, and it could be fifth for them. But this is now, I think, the third season with Dag Arleif Fadugba in charge of the club, and I kind of felt for him last season because I think they would have finished higher had they not had bad luck with injuries and then not sold 2 or 3 really key players in the summer. In the end, they finished 7th, but there were reasons for that. However, it seems that their injury curse has struck again. Christian Borchgrevink is possibly ruled out for the whole season with a knee injury. Their top right back, Odin Thiago Holm, a real promising midfielder. He's out until June. He can still have quite a big influence on them this season, but his injuries now are starting to worry me a little bit. They've lost players over the last 12 months, which is, I think, still going to impact the team, like Aaron Donham, Christopher Clarkson, a couple others as well spring to mind. And Fadugba, as much as I do rate him and respect him, and this guy's going to get as much out of the team as he possibly can. He's not really a modern sort of manager. And I just wonder maybe with Vålerenga whether they need just a more youthful input at the helm. We're in the year 2022 now, and maybe Fadugba, not say he's past it by all means or anything like that, but maybe a more injection of youth and something a little bit different maybe down the line might be what they need. I just feel like Fadugba, you're never going to get a glutton of goals with a Fadugba team. Whereas I feel like all the other top sides may well have goals in them. So they're going to be relying on defence a bit, which is fairly strong. But, with the bad news with a couple of these injuries, it might just limit them. And I don't see them challenging for medals for that reason. They should still be top 6, but nothing too special.
Yes, first game of the season, they're away at Molde, I believe, aren't they, as well? So tough game to start the campaign. That's on the Saturday, 2nd of April. Steve, I just want to ask you about, because you had them second last year. That was your season prediction for them. And, do you think it's the personnel that's changed, or do you just think that maybe, why are you more down on them this season? And who are the sort of 2 or 3 key players that maybe we should look out for? Let's say you're playing fantasy, or, you mentioned they lost quite a few key players. And they seem to be a club that tends to produce quite a lot of talent, don't they?
They produce the talent and then they kind of lose them at the wrong time. That's the problem with Vålerenga. And the same might happen again, like who we're watching out for. Sahawi, he reeks to me as the sort of guy who may well be sold in the summer. Odin Thiago Holm is definitely a midfielder worth watching once he gets back fit. In Vidar Kjartansson, they've got a very experienced striker who will score goals if he stays fit, but he didn't stay fit last season. I like the signing of Petter Strand from Brann. He's a very versatile attacker midfielder, can do a lot of different things. And the actual defence might look a bit boring on paper, but it's got some experience and solid players in it, like Tolas Nation, Leonard Zuter, even Nasberg. And they've brought in Hedenstad, ex-Rosenborg man. He'll be playing right back now. So it's a bit of a no-nonsense defence, really, but it will be solid at times. In goal, Christian Kjetil Haag, I think there's a few question marks about him maybe. He's all right, but he's nothing special. I think you say, well, I'm a bit down on them. I think I was probably a bit too high on them last season. Maybe they were unlucky with injuries and losing players, like you said, but it might be just I was a little bit high on them last season. I'm not down on them. I just feel that they're not going to be in the category for the medal category, really. I just don't have as much of there's not as much of a good feeling around Vålerenga as there is Lillestrøm, for example. Now the feeling around Aalesund and the Lillestrøm fans is far better than Vålerenga of optimism and things. And I just don't see them really kicking on to perhaps the levels that this club deserves. I feel like ever since we started this podcast, we have the same sort of conversation about Vålerenga. It's a big giant of a club, kind of sleeping in a way, and it's just waiting to erupt and title challenge one year. Just don't see it being this year.
There you have it then, top 6. We've got 6th place Vålerenga, 5th place Lillestrøm, 4th place Viking, 3rd place Molde, 2nd place Rosenborg, and 1st place Bodø Glimt. Steve, out of those top 6 sides, the big teams in Norway, I'm asking you now, from a fantasy point of view for the fantasy listeners, give us 4 or 5 names that you quite like. I'm going to throw a few names at you as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off with 9.5 Zlatko Tripic. Is it Zlatko Tripic?
Yeah.
I'm going to start you off with him. And you've also mentioned Sarawi. You think he might leave in the summer. Who else from these sort of 6? If you had to sort of pick maybe like a mini 5-a-side team from these 6 quads, who would you kind of be looking at?
Yeah, I really like Hugo Vettelsson for 8.5 million at Bodø Glimt. I also like Alphonse Samsted, the right back there, for 6 million. I know Samsted is really highly owned, but he's a guaranteed lockdown starter for them in that position, and I think he's getting better offensively over the last year or two, and he can certainly chip in. In terms of Molde, there's not a lot of value with Molde, in my opinion. There's a lot of really highly priced players. Ikram is 12 million, but can he guarantee his minutes? Can you trust Fofana for 10.5 million? I'm not sure. I would say probably Brynhildsen of the premium prices is the most safe pick, but even he's 10.5 million. I quite like Sivert Mansverk, actually, 5.5 million midfielder. I think he's going to get a lot of minutes, and he may chip in with the odd goal, certainly now and then, and assists. So I think that's quite a cheap Molde player. I've got to say, in this whole game, I counted it up. I think there's 20 players in Eliteserien Fantasy who are valued at 9 million or more, and there's just no value at all. It's terrible. I mean, you've only got 100 million to spend, and that works. I think an average of 6.6 million per player. You've got a 15-man squad, so there's some really poor value around. Of the other teams up there, the Rosenborg player I like the most is probably Carlo Holzer at 9.5 million, but again, it's a fairly premium price, but I think he can do chip in with quite a few goals and assists. I also like Raitan, but he is highly priced at 7 million. Do you want to fork out 7 million for a defender? But I think they'll have a good defense, and he will chip in with some assists as well. Who else? Lillestrøm, there's not much value there. The goalkeeper, maybe Christiansen, you could look at him, if they start keeping clean sheets. Otherwise, maybe Ogbu at the back, the centre-back, 5 million. I think their midfield and attackers are quite highly priced at Lillestrøm. And as for Vålerenga, probably the guy that stands out the most is probably Lennart Zuta, the left-back, who I think does take a few set pieces. He's only 5.5 million. Apart from that, Kjartan, if they start scoring goals, then Kjartansson at 10.5 million, maybe you could look at. But if you can only really afford to have 1 or 2 players above 10 million in your whole squad, Jonathan. And there's it's tough decisions, isn't it? You can only really have 1 Berisha, and that's about it, really, or 1 Ikram or whatnot. And you really got to go searching around for value.
Yeah, I am looking to take this league a bit more seriously this season after you somehow managed to beat me by, marginal points tally in Sweden. I still haven't got over that yet. So I think Norway I'm going to focus on this year, maybe see if I can challenge you a bit after your quite terrible season. But there's some names for anyone looking to maybe dip into the fantasy world. If you are, tweet us at Nordic Football. Tell us who you've got in your team. Steve will announce the code to join in a minute, maybe towards the end of the show, so keep listening. That will wrap it up for part 1. In part 2, we will look at the mid-table and the race to stay in the division, some of the new sides who Steve has been analysing, including one team that very much are apt with the meat man soccer sort of mantra, isn't it? There's one team there that I think you'll be supporting this season. Find out who it is after this short break.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast Eliteserien Season Preview. We were talking about fantasy football there in the first half. And if you want to join the NFP League, then the code to join, and this is all in lowercase, PW3SIH. And that, I'm sure, will be tweeted as well at some point. You're already in that league, aren't you, Jonathan? I do believe. You can pull out of it if you want, but I'm expecting a better showing from you in this year's fantasy.
Yeah, I think last season, I do believe I was in the bottom 10, and we had well over about 150 team participants, which was really great to see. So hopefully, if you are listening to this, get on board. We do have a popular mini league in terms of like the mini leagues in the whole game. We're getting more and more popular as more people listen to the show. So fantasy.eliteserien.no. They've got an English section now, I think, so you can actually translate it a bit easier if you need. And it's a standard fantasy football format. I'm doing my team at the moment, and I am ready for it. So, Steve's mentioned the code there. Do you want us to say it one more time, Steve, before we move on?
Yeah, code is PW3SIH. So do feel free to join our fantasy league for a bit of fun there.
Amazing. Well done. And let's move to the mid-tables then now. So you got your top 6 done. I'm going to go from 10th to 7th. Why not? Let's give a bit more credence to the teams who deserve it. So let's start talking with your team in 10th. You've got Strømsgodset there. Now, I remember you saying something on last season's show, Steve. You said, and I'm pretty much sure this is more or less a direct quote, at some point, Strømsgodset will go down. They're just on a downward trajectory. Pretty much sure that's what you said. But that's not reflected in your predictions this season, that you've got them from 14th last year to 10th now. So tell me what's changed. I mean, I know they've had some controversies, haven't they, in the last year or two? Been a bit of a strange team. Where do you pin them now? Why are they in 10th?
Yeah, you made a very good point there that I did say that. And what's actually happened in the last 12 months is they've made some positive steps. Again, the Henrik Pedersen scandal, if we want to call it a scandal, and they replaced him with joint managers, Bjorn Petter Ingebrigtsen and Hakon Wiebe Lund. And it's another situation where the joint manager thing just seems to have really worked well. And again, I always ask the question, who's really calling the shots here and everything and all that lot. But for some reason in Scandinavia, this is a system, a model that works in some places. And I think in Godset, it really has, everyone's been a lot more relaxed. There's been a lot more positivity around the club. To be fair, they signed relatively well last season, but what they have done well is integrated this sort of great team spirit into the side again. And they've promoted some youngsters as well within the squad. It's a very close-knit team, actually. They've hardly added anyone in this off-season, but they've not really lost that many either. And I felt they were on a downward spiral, but I think they've kind of picked themselves up a little bit. And if they can kick on this season, just have another solid campaign, they're in the semi-final of the Cup, as I aforementioned. Who knows? I mean, just 2 wins away from lifting silverware would be tremendous for Godset. I see them in this mid-table vicinity, and I've got 4 teams we're going to talk about now. I see them not good enough to challenge in the top 6, but really these 4 teams, I think, will be too good to get sucked into the relegation battle. Godset, a little bit concerned about how they finished last season, and I'm really concerned about their away form, but I think they've got enough about them to be pretty solid 10th this year.
10th is indeed fairly solid. They haven't had much transfer activity really in or out, have they? I mean, a couple of players will come from the youth academy. They brought in a Ghanaian right back, I believe. Few departures though. Is there any key departures that you think they really miss? And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Steve, is who should we sort of watch out for in this squad?
I don't think they're going to miss anyone. I mean, Jonathan Parr has, I think, retired. So they might miss his sort of influence in the dressing room. But apart from that, there's no one really. I mean, they're welcoming back Lars Jørgen Salvesen, who missed the entire 2021 for injury. as a big target man striker for them. And it's like buying a new player, isn't it, really? And he's going to link up with Fred Friday, who had an okay season last year. He probably didn't live up quite to the heights that I thought he would, but he still did quite well. And I think Friday is someone who will always score goals. I've always rated him. He missed some big chances last year, but he had some really good games as well. They've got youngsters in midfield. Johan Hove, who had a breakout year, 2021. And Tobias Gullikson, a really bright 18-year-old attacking midfielder. Two lads in midfield well worth watching. Also, Krasnik Krasniki is another. So they've got a really nice sort of young engine there in the middle of the park, which I think can drive this team forwards. And at the back, they've got solid experienced players like Valsvik, Gunnarsson and Vilsvik. And it's a nice little blend they've got going. They're strong at home. Marienlyst Stadion is not an easy place to go. They are not travelled very well. They're the worst away record, but they've got enough home strength, and they'll have some good days and bad days. But overall, I think Godset are heading in the right direction again. Well,
their first game, Steve, is against Jerv away. So you mentioned their away record there. I'm not sure if you're going to predict this on the show, but do you think they can maybe overturn that with Jerv? We'll talk about Jerv later, so don't go into them. But just do you think they can start the season well, Godset, to sort of start that mid-table run?
Well, if they can't win there, they can't win anywhere, can they? So I think it's as good a chance as ever. But Salverson coming back into the side, don't underestimate that. If you're in a tough situation away, put your big striker up front, and he might just get you a goal.
He might indeed, and that leads us on to 9th place. Let's go.
Kristiansund in 9th, and this is probably about the highest I've ever predicted them. I think
my boys. Yeah,
this is I think the highest I've ever predicted them. Initially, I actually had them up as high as 7th, and then I suddenly thought, hold on a minute, this is Kristiansund. I can't predict them as high as 7th.
About time we put some respect on their name, Steve. I was about to come up on stage and slap you in the face for your a bit like the Oscars.
Can I just say this is a very dangerous section historically. At least one of these 4 teams will end up in trouble. Like I had Stabæk and Brann in this section last year, and they both went down. So these 4 teams that I mentioned, maybe they should have some fear. Is this the
Twilight Zone? You had them in 11th last season. So what's changed? Is it finally just giving them some respect, or is it because they keep just sticking one on you? That's why I started to like them, because every year they basically give you a Chris Rock.
They finished 6th last year. Like, if they go top 6 this year, I think I'm going to have to do some sort of forfeit, really, because it just can't happen. That said, I do think they'll be a very comfortable mid-table. You've got to respect what they do. Their manager knows his tactics inside out, low possession, counter-attacking. I think they're quite well set up away from home, even though they did struggle on the road last year. And the home ground is one of the smallest in the league in terms of capacity, but it's a real fortress, horrible place to go. Crowds right on top of you. And it's just a real banana skin location. So I think Kristiansund, they've got a big squad. He likes to rotate the players. It's a very hard 11 to predict each week. I would not like to be predicting the starting 11 and getting paid for getting that right. But they've got enough quality in the squad. I think they've not lost anyone of significance. And Kristiansund on their day will have some really strong games, and they'll have some tough games. Sometimes when they're actually favoured and fancy to do well, they struggle. But they love being an underdog, and they love proving me wrong. So they'll probably finish higher than 9th.
Yeah, one thing I love, Steve, just looking at their transfers. I mean, sometimes the beauty of looking at these transfers and spreadsheets and things is you just find some ridiculous teams that you never heard of in your life. Kristiansund have signed a player from a club, and I quote, the name of the club is Mobile Phone. They've signed a guy from Mobile Phone People FC in Ghana called David Agbo. I mean, do you know much about Mobile Phone FC, Steve? I mean, do you get the signal there?
I don't know anything about this David Agbo, but they've also brought in another Ghanaian called Isaac Anan from, I don't even know what club. It's listed as unknown, isn't it? But let me just talk about a couple of their important players. And Sean McDermott in goal. Every single season, this guy comes up with some massive saves. He's good on penalties. If you're looking for a fantasy keeper, like for your whole 30 matches, you could do worse than McDermott, because I think he will rack the points up. And he's one of the better keepers in the league for sure. Underrated, I would say. And another guy I really like for them is Amadou Mido Diop in midfield, an absolute man-mountain midfielder. He's like a technical target man sort of player in right in the middle of that park who has a great engine. So they're two players that I really like there. But they've got a sprinkling of talent across the field. Snorstrand Nielsen, what a great name at right back. He'll go well for them. And solid sort of side, Jonathan. I know you're a big fan of Kristiansund, and they'll continue to go fairly well, I'm sure.
I've always had a soft spot for them just since I remember when they beat Rosenborg one year, quite a few years ago, when they had Nicholas Bentner, wasn't it? And ever since that day, when I think you said there was literally quote unquote no chance they'll win it, and they went and won it. And ever since then, I've just kept an eye on them, constantly turning over your predictions. So yeah, they are my boys this year. I do like a bit of Kristiansund, I have to say. So good, and finishing sixth last season. I mean, at one point they were fourth, weren't they? I think.
Yeah, they were riding high, and
what they've achieved. So yeah. They don't score many goals. 41 last season, which is lower than Odd, finished 13th. But very, very impressed by what they do there. I want to try and get someone on the show from Kristiansund season. So if you are listening, anyone involved with Kristiansund, get in touch. Let's move on to your next prediction, because you've got, as we said there, Godset in 10th, Kristiansund 9th, and in 8th place, a team that we don't sort of talk about that much. You did once describe them as, was it the Newcastle of the Eliteserien?
I don't really think Odd could be described as the Newcastle. Maybe I did. I don't know.
Southampton, I think you called them.
Yeah, they're kind of a bit of a nothing side, but they might be a lot more exciting now. They've got a new manager called Paul Arne Johansson, and he goes by the nickname of Paco. This manager has managed Norway under 18, under 19, and under 20 level over the last 4 years. And it's an interesting route into management, but I've been reading some of this stuff, and he talks a good game. He wants to bring exciting football to Odd, and all the players have been talking very highly of Paco. So I'm actually, for once, excited by Odd, actually. And they're a prime candidate to rebound after finishing a very disappointing 13th last year. Odd, I just don't think they can't be as low as that again, I don't think. And it's just a question of how high up the table they move. I think they move to a comfortable mid-table. I think they'll certainly surprise a few teams at times. And it could be one to watch. I think they're going to play an interesting, exciting brand of football. And he's slowly going to build this squad up to be quite exciting, I think, Jonathan.
To hear you say you're excited about Odd is unprecedented, to say the least. I've always quite liked Odd in a way. I've always thought they don't get much love. I think I just like the badge. They're the sort of team. I think I've said it in the past. If I was playing Football Manager, they're the sort of team I would love to sort of take up. They just I like the badge basically, and I like the kind of status of them. Steve, ins and outs. Have they lost anyone key? Because I see they've lost one player to Molde, for example. Yeah,
Marcus Corsa, who back in the day was on the 10 to watch list, Jonathan. You might remember. But I mean, that's a good signing for Molde. And of course, it's an important loss, but I wouldn't say he necessarily held the whole team together or anything like that. Odd have got a lot of versatile midfielders like Kitolano, Conrad Vallum, Jorgensen, Lekven, who can play sort of out wide if needed, or even centre back, and Odin Bjørtof's another one. So they've got a lot of versatile players. There's a lot of versatile players across the Eliteserien, to be honest with you. I guess you have to get used to playing a lot of different positions. But I like their goalkeeper situation. They've got Leopold Valstedt, who's a very promising candidate. Sondre Rosbach at one point was touted as the next sort of big goalkeeper from Norway. At the moment, he's only the number 2 at Odd. So I don't know what's going to happen there down the line, but they've got a really strong keeping situation. There's a lot of talk about the signing they brought in Joseph Bakai at left back. Supposedly, he's going to get quite a lot of minutes, I think, for Odd this season, and could be a surprisingly good pickup for them. They're from Lillestrøm. and a big lad, Ivan Mesic from Nordsjælland. So, yeah, they've also signed Mikkel Ingebrigtsen recently, just in the last week or so, from Tromsø. Interesting side. And, there are a lot of question marks as well over them. We don't really know exactly what they're going to do, but they looked all right in pre-season. And it might be, I think, a good watch. Quite exciting team. And also, watch out for Tobias Lauritsen up front. I think he could score a few goals from this season.
Yeah, Ingebrigtsen is also one of our former Tentor watchers, isn't he? I remember he was at IFK for a bit, IFK Göteborg in Sweden, and you rated him quite highly, didn't you, in the early days? If it's the one I'm thinking of.
That is him.
Odd, formerly known as Odd Grenland. You might even, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, you might remember Odd Grenland, because they're certainly quite more well known, aren't they? Oldest football club in Norway, part of the attraction, founded in 1894. They've never won the title, but they have won the cup 12 times, which is a joint record. So an interesting team. I've always quite liked the cut of their jib, I'll be honest. So I'll keep an eye on Odd. You've got them in, as you said, they're 8th place. Last season you had them in 9th place, so always mid-table. Let's look at 7th place then to round off this mid-table section. Who have you got in 7th, just below Vålerenga in 6th?
I've gone with Sarpsborg in 7th place. And this is another side. I'm actually very excited about Sarpsborg for the first time in years. They have got a new manager in Stefan Bilborn, ex-Hammarby boss, and another manager who has basically promised an attacking brand of football, exciting style. He wants to entertain the fans. And you look back at his history of results when he was at Hammarby, and you can't kind of question that. There were a lot of overs. He won a cup there, I do believe, at Hammarby. And, it was an exciting team to watch. That season where they nearly won the league, I really enjoyed watching that team. And if he can bring that to Sarpsborg, I think it's quite a bit of a coup in terms of a manager here for Sarpsborg. It feels like a really good hire for them. And they're switching from a 3-man centre defence for the first time in about 3 or 4 years. So it's going to be 4-2-3-1. And I think in this instance, it probably suits them. And I think just kind of rebuilding the team up. They've had a couple of sort of signings in the last week or two, and I think it might take him a year or so to kind of get the side where he wants. But they're a dark horse, and I think quite a few are kind of thinking they're a dark horse this year. They are going to be attacking. I think there's going to be goals at both ends. It strikes to me as a sort of side who might become this crazy sort of team suddenly, which is a far cry from what they were, 12 months ago. So it just shows you how things can change in football. Whether or not they go quite as high as 7th, I might be a little bit optimistic here. Their defence might let them down, but I'd certainly see them moving to mid-table. I think there's enough quality here. They've got the manager, and I think they'll continue to build in the summer. So I think I'm very optimistic about Sarpsborg.
Good to hear some optimism there, Steve. Bilborn's an interesting one. Hammarby are quite a strange club, and obviously the Allsvenskan season preview will delve into that a bit more. Bilborn kind of feel like the jury's out on him, but I do think there is a decent manager in there somewhere for sure. So I can sort of get your excitement, and I do think he will try and be attacking, and I think I do think you've got some good rationale. They had them in 12th last season, so big rise for them, 5 places up to 7th. So that rounds it off for your mid-table section. You got 10th Strømsgodset, 9th Kristiansund, 8th Odd, 7th Sarpsborg, and then obviously top 6 Vålerenga 6th. Lillestrøm 5th, Viking 4th, Molde 3rd, Rosenborg 2nd, and Glimt winners of the title of 2022. So just looking at the mid-table section, we've got 4 teams there, back to fantasy, or sort of, players to keep an eye on. Where's the value in these 4 teams if people maybe looking to pack their squads with a few fillers?
I think I'll start with Sarpsborg here, and it's quite an experienced squad, actually, Jonathan. There's not many starters that are going to be below the age of 25, which is interesting. I don't know whether Bilborn does like a sort of an experienced squad or not, but I like Anton Salatros, midfielder, 6.5 million. I think he can definitely contribute points. And Jonathan Linseth, he's a bit of a slight premium option at 8.5 million, but he's cheaper than quite a few other midfielders. I think goals and assists are going to come through Linseth. And you could also look at Saltvet, actually, for them. I'm not sure if he's going to start regularly, but he's listed as a defender. He may well be playing out on the wing, on the left wing. So, if he can nail down a spot, he could be worth looking at. In terms of the rest of the teams from that midfield section, I mentioned Bakai at odd. He's a very cheap defender at 4.5 million. I'd get him in your squad, certainly. Lauritsen at 8.5 million, I think will score some goals. You could look at the goalkeeper as well, Valstad, if he does nail down that spot. And Godset, I actually think that some of the Godset players are a bit overpriced, I've got to be honest. Hover and Gullikson, I would have loved them to be a bit cheaper. But I can't, I do like a bit of Friday nights, and Fred Friday at 8 million, I think he will definitely get goals. And now that Salverson's in the team as well, maybe there'll be less attention on Friday. So I think Friday could be, I don't think he's a particularly popular pick out there, but he certainly would be for me. And what was the other team? Kristiansund, how could I forget them? Sean McDermott, the goalkeeper, 5.5 million is probably the best I can suggest from them, or maybe Snorstrand Nielsen. Don't sleep on him. 6 million. That's a little bit premium, isn't it? 6 million. Like, for example, that's the same price as Samsted at Glimt. I would definitely go with Samsted over Nielsen, but there's no doubt he does fit into the system quite well.
Yeah, funnily enough, I already have Selectros in my fantasy team, just to give away a bit of a spoiler, but I like him. He was also at AIK, played 100 plus games in Allsvenskan, won titles. So, decent player there at Salzburg. Salzburg could be one to watch this season. I do think I've seen they brought in a lad from Hammarby, former Hammarby man as well, and Guali. So there could be a team to potentially keep an eye on for sure. That wraps up the mid-table section. When we come back from this short break, we will move on to the bottom of the table, who's going down. And we'll look at the new teams as well, which have given Steve a bit of a headache in these last few weeks, trying to get information about them, haven't they? But tune in for part 3 after this short break. Welcome back to part 3 of the Norwegian Eliteserien 2022 Season Preview podcast. One of our most listened to shows of the year, always. So I hope you're enjoying it. We're looking at every single team in the league, predicting where they're going to finish. And we're going to also have, as we've mentioned, some bonus episodes and things like that. So do support us, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, if you are interested. We've looked at the mid-table section. We've looked at the title winners and top 6. We're now going to move on to the promoted teams and round it off with a prediction of who will go down in the Eliteserien this season. So, Steve, in 11th place, you've got one of the newly promoted sides in Aalesund. They're back. Now, give us a brief overview of, where were they last season? How did they come up? And what's changed at Aalesund and why 11th?
Well, this might seem high for many people listening because Aalesund are basically the Norwich of Norway. Or I used to call them the West Brom of Norway, didn't I? But I think the Norwigism is the best way now to describe it. They are just up and down constantly. I think they've had probably 2 relegations, 2 promotions in the last 4 seasons, or along those lines anyway. Now, the last time they came up, I optimistically had them well in mid-table, and it just didn't work out. But this time, I feel like they have got the manager in Lars-Arne Nielsen, experienced head, and I just don't see Lars-Arne Nielsen getting relegated over the course of a whole season. I think it's time Aalesund settle down a little bit at Eliteserien level and for once don't go straight back down.
In terms of where they were before, I remember they had some quite exciting players, didn't they? But they were never really able to gel together, were they? In that, was it 2020 season? I think. Funnily enough, that was the year that Eliteserien was on Eurosport, wasn't it? I remember watching. I think it was the first game of the season or something like that they were on my big HD TV. I loved it.
It was brilliant, wasn't it? I remember that game. It was against Molde. Yeah. It was fantastic. It was that hair on the back of my neck was standing up. It was brilliant.
And there was fans as well, wasn't there? It was even back during COVID day. Well, full COVID. The first game back is April 3rd, Sunday against Kristiansund. How are they going to approach this campaign? Have they got managerial changes? Have they kept anyone from before that you might like to sort of highlight? How are they going to get to this 11th place?
Well, they sacked Lars Bohinen midway through the 2020 campaign. They conceded far too many goals. His system work to dream at Obos level, but it seemed it just at Eliteserien level, they just didn't have the defensive quality. And they brought in Lars-Arne Nielsen, the ex-brand manager, and it was just too late. He couldn't save them. But he's took them straight back up. And I looked at I don't really follow the Obos in great detail, but I looked at this squad, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't actually win the league, because on paper, I think they definitely had the best squad in the Obos last season. HamKam won the league, but Aalesund finished second. But really, they should have been cruising their way to the title. But I've seen it before, where sides like Lillestrøm, Tromsø went down there and didn't probably perform as well as you want. It can be quite depressing, can't it? If you're constantly getting relegated, you've got players who think they're better than they are at that level. Eventually, they settled down after a little bit of a hangover start, and they went on a long unbeaten run until, I think, the last game of the season when they were already up. So, but this is a good squad. They've kept most of their players that they went down with. They didn't lose that many. They've got quality like Simon Nordley, who had 20 assists last season in 30 games. And then he scored 10 goals as well. I mean, I like they've signed some players in defence and goalkeeper. They look good with Sten Gritterbust has come back to the club. This is quite a solid team on paper. And I think with Lars-Arne Nielsen in charge, who is quite a pragmatic coach, he's not like a Warnock or anyone like that, but, he will happily play ugly if he has to. There's going to be, it's going to be 4-2-3-1, nothing too fancy. And, they'll dig in if needs be. There's enough individual quality, I think, to get them by, and they'll just happily look to survive. But I think they can actually do it with a little bit to spare. They could definitely get sucked into the relegation battle. But this is not a bad team on paper, Jonathan. There's plenty of Eliteserien experience here. They've got guys like David Foreman. Do you remember him at Hammarby? Nearly 200 Allsvenskan appearances. He's still only 32. That is a good player to have, isn't it? I think there's enough here for them to sort of certainly survive.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, the big breaking news today, in fact, as we record, is that they've sold one of the sort of main players from that Eliteserien campaign, Nicholas Castro. Has gone to Brann, who obviously have gone down, haven't they? But he's moved down a league to go to maybe arguably a sort of a bigger club. Steve, how do you think that will affect Aalesund and your prediction, of course?
Well, do you remember 2 years ago we were talking about Castro as this really big prospect to look out for in the league, and we were kind of surprised Aalesund kept him really, and he didn't have a bad year in the Eliteserien that year. But he didn't quite reach the heights we expected. He actually seemed to slump. He went backwards last year. He only scored 7 goals and scored 7 goals and had 4 assists. I think there was a few suspensions in there. He may well be the Mitrovic of Norway. Like, too good for Obos, but maybe not quite Eliteserien. Well, I think he is Eliteserien level, but probably not at the level we thought he was going to be. I'm not sure they'll miss him that much. Sigurd Horgan scored 21 goals for them last season. I've mentioned Nordley's weighed in with goals and assists. I don't think he's the key player he once was for Aalesund.
Okay, 11th place. We will talk about some of their players for your fantasy teams as well. I mean, Kristiansund, that should be an exciting game. Come on, UKBK. But let's move to your 11th. So you got them in 11th. Let's move to the newly other promote side. You've got them in 13th. And that is the meat/ham combination we've got here. HamKam have come up. We talked about them a bit last season, didn't we, towards the end of the campaign. They've managed to get promoted, and now they're in Eliteserien. You've got them in 13th, which means they would stay up. Of course, bottom 2 go down. 14th goes into a relegation playoff. So you've actually got HamKam and Aalesund to survive, Steve. Tell us about this new team, HamKam, and how excited are you to see a meat-related product in Eliteserien?
What a great name for a club, HamKam. I kind of feel a little bit old. When I first started covering this league, way back in the day, HamKam were a regular Eliteserien side. And they're back in the league for the first time since 2008. They fell on hard times, financial problems. I think they even got relegated to like tier 4 or maybe even tier 5. And they're back now. They're historically a fairly big club at this level. Decent stadium.
Back in your old days, eh?
What was I going to say? Yeah, nice stadium, historically decent sized club, and it is very nice to see them back. They won the Obos last year, at a canter, really. Best defensive record in the league. Remember, they did have, though, Kjetil Rekdal was in charge of them last season, who's now moved to Rosenborg. So taking over, though, looks they've hired well here by bringing in Jakob Mikkelsen from ex-manager of Hammarby and OB. So Odense in Denmark. So this guy has quite a bit of pedigree, actually. Only 41 years old. He comes with a decent track record. They've got Tom Dent, friend of the podcast, is the assistant manager there now at HamKam. And so that's an interesting sort of coaching lineup they've got going there. As I say, last season they really did well in the Obos. I do have a few concerns about HamKam, though. They've lost some key players. And, Rekdal obviously suited him there with this defensive strategy. Will they continue to be so strong at the back? I'm not sure. And, I think they will have enough to survive. But I don't think it's going to be all plain sailing for HamKam.
Not plain sailing for HamKam. And the other thing they have to maybe deal with, or sort of one what's the word I'm looking for here? One string to their bow is a certain assistant manager, isn't it? Many congratulations to a friend of the pod, Tom Dent, who actually, since we've recorded the last show, I think I've met up with Tom Dent. Had a nice beer with him. We went and watched the non-league game in England when he was back in the UK for a few days. So, yeah, massive good luck to Tom Dent, obviously the former our Blink manager. He's moved from second tier now to assistant manager role at HamKam. So, he'll experience Eliteserien for the first time, and you think they'll stay up. You mentioned sort of a couple of players that they're losing and things like that. I mean, it's always a challenge, isn't it, when manager leaves and things like that as well. It's going to certainly be a challenge for them. They've brought in, I see, a Ukrainian forward. They've also, like you say, they've lost quite a few players. Gifson's fan have taken Rasmus Lindqvist as well, who I always liked him at AIK, by the way. I wonder if that will affect them. So, yeah, I mean, for any HamKam fans listening, obviously we've mentioned that Tom Dent's back. Who are the sort of key players, Tom Dent's moved there, sorry. Who are the sort of key players and key departures that you're maybe concerned about?
Well, Samuel Rogers, the American centre-back, has left to Rosenborg. Steiner Stromnes has retired. He was getting on a bit, but he was the captain, another centre-back. Rasmus Lindqvist has moved on as well. That's three important players. And it looks like Rekdal's trying to sign half their team because he keeps going after this attacker, Christian Eriksen, who's a lot of people talking about. I think he's owned by like 30% of people in fantasy. And, he certainly tore up the Obos League again. 26 years old, a lot. I've never really seen much of him. And, is this another sort of Nicolas Castro syndrome where someone comes up at a sort of an older age and we expect a lot of them? Who knows? The jury's out. I'm going to wait until I see more of him. But I'm always a little bit dubious when someone hasn't already moved up to the top level at the age of 26. Jonas Enkelrud scored a lot of goals for them last season. He's a target man, 32-year-old. Are they going to get as many goals out of him? They got an interesting goalkeeper, Nicholas Hagen, the Guatemalan international goalkeeper, number one choice there for them. So, interesting player. They have signed left back Vegard Kongsro from Bodø Glimt, who might be interesting. They've actually signed 5 new defenders, and it's quite a youthful back line apart from Alexander Melgavis, who I did rate his time at Lillestrøm. So I just worried that defence was so strong in the Obos. Is it going to be as strong this year? It looks like they're going to play a 3-4-3 system, even though I think the manager historically has been more of a flat back 4-man. But Rekdal's system here was very, very effective, so I don't think they're going to change it initially. Interesting team. It's going to be how these new signings go. Fredrik Sjolstad in midfield looks like a good signing from Molde if he can stay fit. Can these players that dominated in the Obos do it in the Eliteserien? Quite a few question marks. I think they'll have enough to survive because they bring with them a winning mentality. Do not underestimate promotion bounce from a team that's used to winning. And I think they'll start the season fairly well. They might tail off, but I think they'll just have enough to survive.
Yeah, interesting analysis. This is a very much a defense-first side. Just looking at the stats from Y-Scout. 4th best in the league in Obos last season for expected goals, which obviously wouldn't have been good enough for them, but expected goals against by miles the best team in the league, 25.87 XG against. The next best team in that league for XG against was Sondal with 38.4. So comfortably the best team defensively in the league by a long way, and that's what's got them promoted. So I guess maybe you could be looking at them as a potential team that, for a few clean sheets, maybe they might have some fancy players you might want to pick up. Only 45% possession average as well last season, fourth bottom of that table as well. So going to be interesting to see how they approach this league. They got, as you've said, first game of the season home to Lillestrøm. It's actually the first game of the entire campaign, Saturday at 3 p.m. April 2nd. So yeah, keep an eye on HamCam. I quite like the badge. If we were doing a badge tournament again, they quite like the look of that. So yeah, let's move on to your rock bottom team if you're happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will round off the sort of newly promoted sides because you've got two of them to survive. We just mentioned there. HamCam and Aalesund, but rock bottom of this table, Steve, you've got Jerv. You're not part of this Jerv fairy tale, are you? Because I remember back in the last season, you weren't even very happy that they got promoted. It was a remarkable promotion campaign, but you've got them to go right back down as bottom of the league. Tell us firstly how they got promoted in the first place. What do they do well, and then tell us why you think they will just be tumbling straight back down again.
Well, I've got a question for you here, Jonathan. How familiar are you with Wolverines? Wolverines, yeah.
You mean like the Marvel character? Or?
No. The animal, the real life animal.
I can't say I deal with them on a day-to-day basis, but
so Jerv is the Norwegian word for Wolverine. So that is their sort of nickname, name, whatever you want to call it.
Really like that.
Yeah, they're from I've actually forgotten what city they're from. Grimstad, that's it, yeah. But Jerv is like the Wolverines of Norway. So it's an interesting sort of name. It's the first ever time they are in the Eliteserien in their history.
Wow.
So this is brand new territory for them. And if they live up to their nickname, Wolverines are not to be messed with, from what I've been told.
I do like that name. You've already got my ears peaked up here.
They're not to be messed with, and they're quite a ferocious creature who will defend their territory. So if they live up to the nickname, they could be difficult. But look, you know me. I have to think with my head over my heart a lot of the time. And I look at this team and I struggle to see how they don't finish bottom of the table, to be honest, Jonathan. It's I know I've been here before with sides, and Ranheim spring to mind. And Ranheim are actually semi-pro. Jerv are a fully professional club. But I just look at this team and it just doesn't look to me like it's got enough quality. They've signed a lot of new players, but it looks almost mercenary-esque. Where are these guys going to fit together particularly well? I remember with Ranheim, everyone knew each other. Everyone was sort of... There's so much great team spirit at that club that's why they kind of had a great first season. I'm not sure the same will happen with Jerv. They lost their best player, Diego Campos, to Degerfors, who was an absolutely crucial player for them last season. So that immediately gets me concerned. There's not much Eliteserien proven talent here at all. And there's a couple of new signings who might prove all right, but I don't know much about them. But their home ground is known for being a bit of a dive, to say it politely. It's the lowest attendance ground in the league. That might work in their favour. It might be the sort of place no one wants to go. But I just look at it on paper at the squad, and this club doesn't feel like it's ready for Eliteserien. I hope they enjoy their season, and they should be celebrated for the first ever time getting up here. But I feel like it's going to be a really tough ride for them.
Tough ride for the Wolverines. I already, when you tell me something like that, I'm excited straight away. I don't know too much about their history, of course, like you said, but they're the way they got promoted, that penalty shootout was incredible. It was against Brann, wasn't it?
Mm.
And I remember watching that, and there wasn't that many people in the stadium, like you said, but I remember there was one fan on Twitter or Instagram even maybe, and there was like fireworks going off after it, and people were dancing around on the pitch. I don't know who that fan was. I'd like to find that. I think it was Instagram. So if you are a Jerv fan, please do get in touch this season, because I'd love to maybe get some more sort of fans maybe on this season and listeners, just to tell us about the club and that kind of thing. So we'd love to hear from someone from Jerv. I mean, Steve, you've got them rock bottom. You think they just have a horrible season. And I did, that kid you mentioned who's going to Degerfors, I've been looking at him for the Swedish season preview, by the way. He looks quite good. If they are going to stay up, or if they are going to do anything in this league, how will they manage to do it? Where are the goals? Maybe where are the points going to come from if they can? Because first game of the season, they've got to say, as we mentioned, at home. If they can defend their turf, how are they going to do so?
I've looked at this squad, and it's not like Mjøndalen, who were kind of big lumps and big physical sides. It looks like there's a few technical players here, not necessarily fast players, but technically okay players. And they might actually try and play a bit of football, but I think if they're going to survive, then probably Willis Furtado, who was last year's top scorer, Cape Verdean, who is regarded as a strong mental player from what I've read, is going to have a strong season. And they've got a midfielder called Matthias Wickman, experienced guy in the middle there, who is the captain. I think it's arguably probably going to be their best player. Both of them two have got to stay fit, and he's got to have a good season. Got an interesting guy from PEC Zwolle. They've signed Leandro Fernandez, who might have some pedigree, just a gut feeling. But I'm only going on what research into this player. He might prove to be terrible though as well. But they have signed nearly, I think, a good 8 or 9 new players, and it's a big question of who settles in here. There's some of these new guys will sink, but maybe some will swim as well. The defense looks quite slow. That concerns me. They've got a manager who's been with them a long time, Arne Sandstø. I think he's been there since 2016, so he knows the place really well. Look, they'll have their day in the sun. There'll be some games where teams do not want to travel there, and who knows, they might even surprise a few at the start of the season. But it's quite a strong league this year, Eliteserien. I think if it was a year where the sides were really poor, they might have even a chance of potentially competing. But I just feel that they're going to finish bottom by default. I think I could see them getting between sort of 20 to 25 points. It's going to be a tough year, but who knows? Maybe there can be a pleasant surprise. I've been wrong about this sort of side before, so I'm not going to completely write them off.
Yes, indeed. Jerv, there you go, everyone. Bottom of the league. Keep an eye out for it. We've got a few more teams left in the season preview podcast. Obviously, those are the promoted teams we've got in 11th, 13th, and 16th. So let's look at your 12th place team, a team that doesn't really get much coverage, and since they lost Bruno Leite, I've lost all interest in them. It is Haugesund you've got in 12th.
I'm worried. I'm really, really worried for Haugesund, and I very nearly put them in my bottom 3, to be honest, Jonathan, because I believe they're just 2 or 3 key injuries away from being in huge, huge trouble. It's a very small squad, and it has been for a while, to be honest with you. I just feel like Haugesund, if they're not careful, they're going to become a bit of a nothing club. And I've seen sides like this eventually go down. You know how I mentioned last year I was worried Godset would kind of fall into this category, and they managed to rebound. I'm kind of saying the same about Haugesund here. I've seen it happen with sides that have gone down before. It's happened with Lillestrøm a little bit. Brann. If you're not careful and you don't sort of address issues, you can end up in trouble. But I don't really know what Haugesund's identity is. They've got a sprinkling of good players, but it is a really, really thin squad. Like I said, they're going to be quite defensive-minded. I worry a little bit where the goals are going to come from if Alexander Söderlund, an aging Alexander Söderlund, doesn't come off. I'm not very optimistic about them this year, Jonathan, and it wouldn't honestly surprise me if they ended up going down.
Yes, and just sort of looking at them as well, like we said, they've lost quite a few players over the years. And their outs seem to be larger than their ins in this window.
Yeah.
Christopher Velda's gone, who's gone to Lech Poznan for nearly £1 million, which is quite a big move, Steve, for them. Must have brought in quite a lot of money from that. And they've brought in a centre-back from Midtjylland called Soren Reith, I believe, and someone from Vitesse called Hilary Gong. Just tell us sort of like you said you're worried. Who are the ones that you've lost that you're really upset about, and where do you see them going from here? Because you said they lack an identity, and that's always an interesting word in football, identity. You know, what is that? What actually is Haugesund's identity?
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's a very good question. And I actually quite like the manager, Jostein. But again, I don't get excited when I think about Haugesund.
No.
I'm not saying I ever have done, but I've never really been like disappointed with them either. It's just there's just a real lack of optimism in terms of Christopher Velder was a really good player for them, and he's deservedly got his move to a better league, and that's a big loss. He was a massive part of their creativity. Niklas Sandberg to Viking, I mean he's big. Benjamin Hansen, towering centre back. Molde have snapped him up. Alexander Stolas, yes, he was getting on a bit, but he was a big part of the dressing room. I loved his influence. Even another experienced lad, Joachim Nielsen, I think him leaving is a blow. And their new signings don't fill me with much confidence at all. And, you know, that it looks like they're going to be promoting from within. I think a return loanee, Christoph Zafiris, who was back Growwood on loan. I think he's a decent young player mentally, and he might be getting quite a few minutes. The squad is really thin. I'm not sure how many new players are going to come in. Like I said, they've got a few key guys like Martin Samuelsson, Alexander Soderlund, and at the back there, probably Ulrich Fredriksson is a key man. But if they lose some of these guys for a prolonged period, they could be big. Already Samuelsson, I think he's injured maybe for the first game. Then they could be in trouble. I worry about them all over the park if injuries set in. It's not like one area. But, you know, they're an experienced squad, and it's a tough place to go to, Haugesund. It's a grass pitch. Sometimes, I mean, the weather seems awful there. They may well just about get enough home points to keep them afloat. But, yeah, it's going to be a challenging year.
Yeah, looking at Haugesund in terms of a bit of trivia about them, they actually nicknamed the Seagulls, and their supporters club is called the Markerberget, which is the Mountain of Seagulls, the independent supporters club of Haugesund, based on the 3 seagulls on the city's coat of arms, the mountain, inward, the fjord, and along the sea. So, I mean, I'm looking at their crest, and it gives me Brighton vibes, Brighton and Hove Albion vibes. I don't know if that's a fair comparison to be made. Main rivals are Viking, according to Wikipedia, and to a lesser extent, Brann. But I don't know if that's true or not. You'll have to confirm that for me. But yeah, Haugesund, one of those teams that haven't really been on our radar. They did get to the Europa League qualifiers, didn't they, in 2020, which was decent. But apart from that, they've kind of slumped a bit. Since then, they've gone 7th, then 9th, then 11th. And who knows where they're going to end up in 2022. But you've got them to be below 11th. In fact, you've got them as 12th. So let's look at then the relegation playoff and the relegation place, because you've got Jerv to go down. You've got Aalesund 11th, Haugesund 12th, HamKam 13th. That leaves 2 more teams left on this season preview. One of them to be relegated and one of them to be in the relegation playoff. So whoever you want to start with first, Steve, let's take it away. Who's going to be in trouble this season?
Well, I've gone with Tromsø in the playoff spot, and I've gone with Sandefjord second bottom. And with Tromsø, it's a tough one because I just worry that they might have a little bit of second season syndrome with Tromsø. They did well on their return to the league to survive, mostly due to a strong sort of last 10 games where they finally started to pick up points at home. They had, I think, the most under 2.5 goal games out of anyone in the league, which kind of suggests that they did lean more on defence towards the back end of that season. And, you know, they've got 3-man defence. Sometimes it's a 5-man defence. So you can see why they do get involved in some lower scoring games. But, you know, they just might just drop down a little bit this season. They've lost a goalkeeper, Karlström, to Molde. The replacement is Jakob Haugaard from IE Core. He's injured, I think, for the first 3 or 4 weeks. If he doesn't kind of come off well as a signing, they could be in some trouble there. They have lost Thomas Totland as well. He was a really good player for them. One of the wing backs in there. The wing back is a really crucial part of Tromsø's system. So to lose one of those and a really top guy as well, I think that is concerning. They've still got some some reasonably decent players, a sprinkling of decent players, but it just could be a year. I think they might lack goals at times. It just might be a struggle. I think they're going to be in the relegation dogfight. They might just about have enough, but it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, Totland, by the way, he will feature on our season preview because he's moved to Sweden, and is one that I'm interested to see of using him. You seem to quite rate him, so that's interesting. I've been studying him, so we'll talk about him maybe on the next show. But you quite like Tromsø, don't you? I mean, you talked on last year's show very interestingly about the sort of brand and Bodø Glimt Tromsø kind of rivalry, and how it was almost like Manchester City, Manchester United type thing, where although it's more organic Glimt, certainly the Manchester City in terms of their funding, but the kind of smaller city or smaller town rivals have kind of usurped the so-called big boys. Tromsø have really struggled in recent years, and they've had to watch their neighbours do so well, haven't they?
They're under a dark cloud from Glimt. There's no doubt about it. There for sure. It must be a difficult time. I think it's a big year for Tromsø. If they can just survive this term, then I think they can maybe kick on as a club again. But this is the year where, I mean, if I wanted to be optimistic, I would say they could go as high as, say, 11th, be a fairly low-scoring team and sort of grind their way to survival, use their home advantage well. But if I'm being negative, it just might go kind of pear-shaped for them. It did concern me how long it took them to actually get a home win last season. For some reason, they were better away from home. I don't know why. Probably the system, maybe, is a reason for that. Some players to watch out for. Definitely August Mikkelsen is a bright young talent. How long they can keep him for, I'm not sure. I like Sakarius Opsal as well in midfield. I think he's a good technical player. And they've got a bunch of kind of experienced defenders who, will be hard to break down at times. I don't think they're going to be the most watchable side in the world. Not boring either necessarily. It's just, I think their games will naturally contain fewer goals, just kind of the style they play. But again, they're another side, a bit like Haugesund. If they lose injuries to key players in midfield and attack especially, you kind of wonder who's going to step up. They've got a lot more depth in defence, but the squad does lack a little bit of flair and quality going forward at times, I think.
Yeah, so dark times for Tromsø. 14th place, you got them in relegation playoff. I wonder who they would play. Could be Brown even. That would be one hell of a clash. And in 15th place, you've got Sandefjord to go down. They've flirted with it, haven't they, in recent years? You did have them as bottom last season, in fact, and you had Tromsø 13th last season. So you've got both of them kind of, in trouble again. Sandefjord, you think will get relegated, Steve?
Yeah, I think you've got to give Sandefjord massive credit last season. Maybe even the biggest overachieving side in the whole league. Another team that have got a dual managerial couple in charge, Hans-Erik Ødegaard and Andreas Tegström. Probably the last time you hear those two names mentioned this season in the pod. I'll be referring to them as the duo. Did really well last season, but I feel like they overachieved. I think they overachieved quite a lot in terms of XG, expected points, stuff like that. And they've lost players. They've lost with success. Kind of, you pay for your own success sometimes. Bryce Wembangoma has gone to Glimt. Vidar Ari Johnson, who had a massive year, has moved on. Christopher Hansen as well had a top year. In fact, they've lost quite a lot of players. Some not so important, but there's quite a few outs. Not that many have come in, which is a concern. The strongest part for Sandefjord, I think, is goalkeeper Jakub Storovic. I still don't know why no one good has bought this guy. I rate this goalkeeper. But interestingly, they've actually brought in another keeper called Hugo Keto from HJK Helsinki. So their goalkeeping line looks at the strongest part of their squad. I wonder if Storovic might move on in the summer, and it's kind of a contingency measure already. As for their other new signings, I don't know an awful lot about them in particular. The squad just seems to genuinely lack quality. They managed to kind of counteract that last season. But, for the second year in a row, in what might be a stronger Eliteserien this season, I feel they're certainly in the relegation battle. They might survive, they might not. I mean, I see them as the second automatic relegation side. I think it'll be close. I think Jerv will be rock bottom. I think after that, there's 5 or 6 teams who are in the mixer, and I'm just edging towards Sandefjord for that second automatic spot.
Yeah, they finished 10th place last season, and you said, as you mentioned, it was one of the biggest overachievements. Scored a low number of goals, 38. Same as Brand, obviously, who ended up going down, but wasn't expecting much of them, was there, Sandefjord last year? They start the campaign against Haugesund. What do you see in that game, Steve, just to start off the campaign? Because it looks like those two teams are going to struggle this year. Is it going to be sort of who can get off the mark quicker? And in terms of Sandefjord going down, is there anything they can do maybe in the window, the days left in the window, or are they a team that doesn't spend that much, really?
I mean, that result of that game could be big. It could determine which side gets off to a better start, which could be massive in terms of who stays up. I see it as a poor quality, low scoring match, to be honest. It's probably a massive under 2.5 goal contender. What can they do? I think they need goals. They lack a goal scorer for me. I mean, it looks like Alexander Ruud Tavita is going to be the starter up front, and he might be useful, but he's not. You wouldn't hang your house on him scoring that many. They need a little bit more help in terms of goal scoring, in my opinion. They just need a little bit of quality, of extra quality, full stop. But let's be real. This is a club that don't have particularly great resources, and expectations are not going to be that high. We can't criticize them or anything. They're just going to try their absolute best to try and stay in the league again, and try and build that way. And it might not be pretty. They might have enough. I was impressed with what these two managers did last season for them. So we can't underestimate Sandefjord. But when a side generally overachieves, the next season, inevitably they come down a little bit. It's just a question of how far. So I just don't see them kicking on. It's just a regression of how much. And, definitely relegation battle, just a question of how low.
There you go then. That is about it we've got for this season preview. In terms of the league table. Do you want to recap then, Steve, from 6
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll recap my predicted table. I'm going to start right at the top. Bodø Glimt to win the league. Rosenborg in second, with Molde in third. Viking fourth, Lillestrøm fifth, and Vålerenga rounding out my top 6 prediction. 7th place, Sarpsborg. Odd 8th, Kristiansund in 9th. Strømsgodset rounding out the top 10. 11th place, I've gone with Aalesund, with Haugesund in 12th and HamKam in 13th. Tromsø, 14th, the relegation playoff position. Sandefjord in 15th, automatic relegation. And Jerv as the bottom place club this season. There you have it. It was a long season preview. Hope you enjoyed it, and bring on the season.
Magnificent shift as always, my friend. That is pretty much it for this season preview episode. As mentioned, 10 to watch will be on Patreon. Patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. Keep an eye out for it. Some big names in there to keep an eye on. And we've already given you a few now here as well. So, as we've said, we've got a free episode and a Patreon episode. So stay tuned for that. But first round's coming up. Get your fantasy team in. We've given you the code. I don't know if you want to repeat it one more time, Steve.
I suppose I'd better maybe talk about just a couple of players in that bottom 6 who might be a bit of fantasy value before I do the code. And I would say, for me personally, I know I was a bit down on Tromsø there, but August Mikkelsen at 8 million as a midfielder could be a good buy for your team still, because he's going to play up front, I think, as a striker most weeks. He's fast, he gets in behind. And if you're going to get midfielder points scoring goals, I think that's pretty damn decent, really, if you ask me. There's not too many others from these sides. Maybe Aalesund, you could look at Sigurd Hågen as a 7.5 million striker, or even Simon Nordley as a 7.5 million midfielder. But not too much stood out from Haugesund or Jerv or Sandefjord to me. I mean, you certainly dicing with death. Maybe look at favourable fixture runs for these sides and they might have something, but not too much stood out. I know, like you say, Eriksson was a popular pick for HamKam at 7 million, and I think that Eriksson for me is a boom or bust. I think he's either going to really tear up the league. I mean, Rosenborg were linked with him, but I just wonder if that's because Rekdal knows him. The other lad from Hamcam, maybe Mel Gavis at right wing back there, could be worth looking at. But I think you're taking a few risks if you're looking to fill your sides with like Sandefjord or Jerv players.
Good stuff. Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot to ask you, but what's the code again?
The code PW3SIH to join the Nordic Football Podcast.
Well done.
Fantasy League. And yes, the 10 to watch will be on Patreon before the start of the weekend. So keep an eye out for that.
That'll be it. We'll also have the Allsvenskan season preview 2022 to come. I've been brushing up on my spreadsheets. So stay tuned. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Do tweet us at Nordic Football or follow us on Twitter if you don't already. Twitter at Nordic Football. We're also on LinkedIn these days. Just starting off on there, but not many followers or anything like that. But we tend to put the podcast on there. Obviously, we put the episode with the most recent episode on there with a Danish perspective. So, yes, we will be back for next week as well, recapping the sort of first weeks and everything like that. And we're back into the rhythm of it. So, really well done, Steve. Thanks very much. Pretty much that ends this episode for now. So, without further ado, unless you've got any last comments, thanks for your work.
Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, do like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments as well, and we'll get back to you. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show, and it was an epically long one again. I can just talk forever, can't I, sometimes? So apologies for that. But really enjoyed it, Jonathan, and looking forward to the season now.
Great stuff. That'll be all. Enjoyed being with you, Steve, and see you again in 2022. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for your continued support. It's year number 5. We might even hit 150 episodes this year. Who knows? So let's see how it goes. But for now, thanks for listening. Jonathan Fadugba. You can find me on Twitter at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL. And you can find Steve on Twitter at MeatManSoccer. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Goodbye.